Don't track dirt in here, old man. We're not hiring. That was the first thing Elias Thorne heard before he even set foot inside Southern Star Mercedes-Benz in Savannah, Georgia. The words shot out from a young white customer standing near the entrance, loud enough for the sales staff to hear and laugh under their breath. It wasn't the kind of laugh you hear in a friendly room. It was the kind that told Elias exactly what they saw when they looked at him. Someone who didn't belong. It was a humid afternoon. The kind where Georgia heat sticks to your skin like a second shirt. Elias stepped forward anyway, his worn-out work boots hitting the polished tile with a dull thump. Mud clung to the soles from his morning site inspection. His faded flannel shirt hung loose on his shoulders, and his baseball cap carried the old red clay stains of South Georgia. To anyone watching, he looked like a man who'd spent his whole life in manual labor, and that was exactly why they underestimated him. Elias Thorne, 72 years old, wasn't there to ask for a job. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He wasn't broke. He was a retired structural engineer whose fingerprints sat on half the skyline of downtown Atlanta. He was a landowner, a quiet philanthropist, a man who'd spent decades building opportunities for others, even when few had offered him the same courtesy. But today, he wasn't thinking about skyscrapers or contracts. He was thinking about his granddaughter, a Leah Honor Roll student, first in the family accepted into an Ivy League program. Elias had promised her something special for graduation, a pearl-white Mercedes-Benz GLE 450. He wanted her to step into her future with dignity, confidence, and the kind of respect he'd had to fight for his whole life. Yet the moment he walked through the glass doors, that familiar sting hit his chest, the one he knew too well. The sting of being judged by the surface, the sting of being read wrong, dismissed wrong, valued wrong. A sting born long before he was, passed down through generations like an unwanted heirloom. Inside, 3 salesmen stood near the front desk, lounging in tailored suits. Their conversation stopped when they saw him, replaced by the kind of silence that speaks louder than any words. They didn't greet him, didn't smile, didn't ask how they could help. One of them tugged his blazer straight, as if Elias's presence alone wrinkled the air around him. The youngest salesman, Brent Malone, let out a smirk that curled like smoke. He didn't even bother hiding it. "Sir," Brent said, his voice coated in fake politeness, "just letting you know up front we're not doing any walk-ins for test drives today. Especially not for high-end models?" Elias paused. "I'm not here for a test drive," he answered, his voice steady, deep. The kind that carried decades of storms weathered and survived. "I'm here for the GLE 450 you've got in the window." Brent raised an eyebrow as if Elias had told a joke with no punchline. "That SUV starts at 80 grand, he replied. "And we don't unlock those doors without a pre-verified credit check." A couple browsing nearby looked over. One whispered something to the other. Elias didn't need to hear the words. He'd heard them all before, in different forms, different decades. This wasn't new, this wasn't surprising, but it still hurt. In that moment, a memory flickered, Elias at 16, being told to use the back entrance of a shop, a security guard trailing him through a hardware store in 78, the hotel clerk in 92, who insisted the penthouse suite was reserved for paying guests only. Every era had its own version of the same wound. He drew a slow breath. Not anger, just a deep, heavy disappointment. "I'm not using credit," Elias said quietly. "I'm paying cash." Brent chuckled, shaking his head. "Sir, the used truck lot is 3 blocks down. Might find something more fitting." The showroom laughed again. Small, sharp, cutting. And right in the middle of that pristine floor, Elias made a decision. A quiet one, a powerful one. They didn't know who he was. They didn't know what he owned. They didn't know what was about to happen. But they would. In 10 minutes, they would. And Savannah would remember this day. But what nobody inside that dealership knew, what not even Elias hinted at, was that in less than 10 minutes, the man they mocked for his boots would flip the entire building on its head. And before the hour ended, every person in that showroom would wish they'd treated him differently. The air inside Southern Star Mercedes-Benz was cold enough to make Elias's joints tighten, but the looks he got were colder. He took a slow step forward, scanning the glossy floor, the spotless glass, the silver star logos shining from every wall. Everything here gleamed, except the way they saw him. Brent didn't bother hiding his smirk as he turned away, signaling to the other salesman with a small flick of his wrist. A gesture that said, Don't waste your time. He's not a buyer. One of the men chuckled quietly. Another shook his head like Elias was some kind of inconvenience that had wandered in off the street. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was the kind of subtle disrespect that black folks recognized instantly. The kind that starts before you say a single word. Elias had been through enough decades to understand exactly what kind of judgment was being placed on him without trial, without evidence, without hesitation. He felt it in the way the room shifted, the way conversations died, the way bodies positioned themselves just slightly away from him. Nobody had to say the word. The energy said it for them. Elias walked toward the SUV in the center of the showroom, the pearl-white GLE 450 glistening under the spotlights. It was a beautiful machine. Elegant, confident, the kind of car he wanted for Elias. But behind him, he could hear footsteps following. Not friendly ones. "Sir," Brent called out again. His tone was different now, tighter, impatient, like he was talking to someone who needed instructions just to stand in the right place. "We don't allow customers to get close to the premium vehicles without approval." Approval. The word landed like a slap. Elias turned slightly, and Brent stood with his arms crossed, chin raised. Not a welcome, not an offer to help, just a gatekeeper blocking a doorway he didn't own. "That's store policy," Brent added, shrugging as if the rule was carved in stone. But Elias knew better. He'd seen 3 other customers, 2 white couples, walk right up to the same SUV without so much as a glance from staff. They touched the door handles, peeked inside, even opened the trunk. No questions, no credit checks, no barriers. Yet here he was, treated like a stranger trespassing in someone else's world. A young black woman behind the counter, probably no older than 22, looked up from her computer. Her eyes met Elias's for a brief second. She didn't say a word, didn't move, didn't interfere. But the apology in her gaze was loud. She'd seen this before, probably lived it before, and she knew exactly how this would unfold if she stepped in. Elias gave her a small nod of understanding. He didn't blame her. It wasn't her fight. Brent stepped closer. "Sir, you're tracking mud around the showroom. My manager's gonna flip if he sees that." He pointed dramatically at a tiny dried speck near Elias's boot toe, bigger than a dime. Elias looked down at it. One little brown dot against 1,000 square feet of white tile. "I'll stay on the walkway," Elias said calmly. Brent didn't budge. "I think it's best you head out. We've got real buyers coming in today." Real buyers. There it was, the line that revealed everything. A couple standing near the service desk watched the scene unfold. The woman whispered, "Why's he even in here?" The man shrugged, glancing at Elias like he already had the answer. Elias's jaw tightened, but he held himself steady. He'd spent a lifetime learning how to carry the weight of moments like these without letting them crush him. He lifted his chin and met Brent's eyes. "I told you," Elias said, his voice like stone. "I'm here to see that SUV." Brent shook his head, half laughing. "Sir, I'm not wasting time opening an $80,000 car for someone who's just browsing. You want a test drive? You want to sit in it? You need a verified credit check. That's how we make sure we're not, how do I put this, miscalculating our time." One of the other salesmen snorted. Another pretended to clear his throat to hide his laugh. Elias didn't respond right away. He looked around the room slowly, every face, every stare, every unspoken assumption carving a familiar ache in his chest. The kind of ache passed down from fathers to sons, from grandmothers to grandchildren, baked into the soil of the South like red clay. He took a quiet breath, not defeated, not broken, just disappointed. They didn't know him. They didn't know what he'd built. They didn't know whose name sat on the deed beneath their feet. But they would, because prejudice may be silent, but so was power. And Elias Thorne had plenty of both. And as Brent's laughter echoed across the showroom, Elias felt something shift inside him, not anger, not fear, but a quiet certainty. They had no idea who they were talking to, but they were about to find out. Because the next move he made would change everything. Brent didn't stop at blocking Elias's path, he doubled down. He stepped in front of the GLE 450 like a bouncer guarding a VIP section. He planted himself so close that Elias could see the shine on his overpriced watch and smell the mint gum he kept chewing like he owned the whole building. "Sir," Brent said. lowering his voice but raising his attitude. "I'm trying to save you some embarrassment. These vehicles aren't cheap. We don't want anyone getting their hopes up for something that's out of reach." The words weren't loud, but they were sharp. They didn't slice the air, they sliced dignity. A couple nearby turned their heads again. One of the salesmen leaned against a counter, arms folded, watching the whole thing like it was entertainment. The others whispered behind their hands, trying to hold in laughter. They weren't even pretending to hide it anymore. Elias held his ground. "I told you I'm paying cash." Brent let out a short, mocking laugh, the kind that comes from someone who believes they already know the whole story. "Cash? Sir, most folks who say that can't even afford the tires." He gestured at Elias's boots, his cap, his flannel. "Look, I'm not trying to be rude, I'm trying to be real. We don't open up high-value vehicles for casual browsers. And we definitely don't skip the credit check." Elias stared at him, silent, steady. 2 seconds, 3, 4. But inside, something familiar stirred an old hurt. A bruise pressed by too many hands over too many years. It wasn't just about the car, it was about being told again and again that he didn't belong in spaces he had every right to stand in. Brent looked around as if expecting applause, and he got eye tone of the salesman chuckled out loud. Another said, "Man, this is wild," under his breath. The young black receptionist behind the counter saw it all. She looked down quickly, pretending to rearrange papers, but her jaw clenched tight. She'd been on the other end of that tone before. Way too many times. Brent clapped his hands once like he was wrapping things up. "Okay, sir. The used truck lot down on Abercorn Street. That's your best bet. Plenty of older models, good prices, no need for credit checks over there." He pointed toward the door like he was giving directions to someone lost. Elias didn't move. Brent sighed dramatically and gestured toward the tiny brown speck near Elias's boot again. "And the mud. Please, this is a luxury showroom. We keep things clean." One of the salesmen added, "Yeah, man, can't have dirt everywhere." Dirt. That word hit harder than all the others. Elias's father had been called that word. His grandfather, his uncles, men who worked twice as hard for half the credit, and still got treated like they didn't deserve a seat at the table or the front door. Elias felt heat rise in his chest, not anger, but something deeper. A quiet, burning truth. Brent stepped closer, lowering his tone as if offering friendly advice. "Sir, I'm telling you for your own good. This isn't the place for you. Save your time. Save ours." It wasn't the words. It was the assumption. It was always the assumption. Elias lifted his eyes slowly until they locked on Brent's. When he spoke, his voice was low, steady, unshaken. "Young man, I've built hospitals, schools, office towers, and more roads in this state than you've driven on." He paused. "You don't know what's within my reach." Brent blinked, thrown off for a split second, but his ego kicked right back in. "Okay, sir, I've got work to do. If you don't leave, I'll have to call security. That's policy. Security." Elias released a slow breath. That single word carried decades of history. It was the go-to threat black folks knew too well. A tool used not for safety, but for control, for removing people who looked like him from places deemed not for them. Another couple walked in at that moment. They were greeted instantly with smiles and handshakes, the kind of welcome Elias never received. Brent flashed them a polished grin before turning back to Elias. "Sir, I don't want to repeat myself. Please exit through the main doors." The humiliation settled heavy in the air. Public, unnecessary, familiar. Elias looked around the showroom one last time. The lights. The polished chrome. The people who couldn't imagine he belonged there even for a second. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He didn't let pride make him lose control. Instead, he nodded once. A quiet, powerful gesture. "All right," he said, "if that's how you want to handle it." Brent smirked again, thinking he'd won something. But Elias wasn't stepping out in defeat. He was stepping out to make a phone call that would flip this entire building upside down. 10 minutes. That's all it would take. The sun outside felt hotter than it had before, heavy and pressing, like Savannah itself knew something had gone wrong inside that dealership. Elias stepped through the glass doors without looking back, boots tapping the concrete sidewalk with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a man choosing peace over pride. He didn't storm out. He didn't slam anything. He didn't spit a single angry word. He just breathed. A long, controlled inhale. A patient, steady exhale. People who knew him used to say Elias Thorne had a special kind of quiet, the kind that made other men nervous without him ever raising his voice. And today, that quiet wrapped around him like armor. He pulled out his phone, an older model with a cracked corner on the screen, the kind that made people assume he couldn't afford a new one. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed, not a bank, not a friend, not a family member. A man who owed him respect. A man who owed him answers. A man who rented a whole lot of land from him every single month. Elias pressed call. The phone barely rang twice. "Mr. Thorne?" The voice on the other end immediately sharpened. "Sir, good afternoon. Are you needing anything?" Elias didn't waste time. "I'm standing outside your Savannah location," he said calmly, "and we need to talk about your staff." There was a pause. Not long, but long enough for Elias to hear the fear forming. He'd dealt with enough business partners over the years to know exactly when someone realized trouble was coming. "Sir, you're here? At the dealership?" "My team didn't tell me." "They wouldn't," Elias interrupted. "They don't know who I am." Another pause. Longer. "Mr. Thorne, please don't move. I'll be right there. I'm only 10 minutes away. I'll bring my top associate." Elias hung up before the man could say anything else. He slid the phone back into his pocket and looked at his reflection in the glass wall of the dealership. He saw the dusty boots, the old flannel, the sun-worn skin of a man who had worked outdoors most of his life. A man Brent had dismissed without ever asking his name. He had to smile at that. From inside, through the tinted windows, he could still see the salesman. Brent was leaning against the counter, recounting the scene with dramatic hand gestures. The others laughed. Even from where Elias stood, he could sense the arrogance in every movement. One of the men mimicked a hunched posture, dragging his foot as a joke mocking Elias's walk. Another imitated his deep voice, saying, "I'm paying cash," like it was the punchline of a bad comedy routine. Brent laughed the loudest. Inside the showroom, the young black receptionist saw it happen. She didn't join the laughter. She didn't look at Elias anymore either. She just sat still, staring down, shoulders tight, trying to stay invisible. Elias didn't get angry. He didn't point. He didn't shout. He just stood there, the quiet building inside him, like the tide pulling back before a wave. 10 minutes, he thought. He had seen prejudice before. He'd seen worse than this. He'd lived through years where these moments weren't subtle. They were loud, dangerous, violent. Years when men who looked like Brent had more power than they deserved, and men who looked like Elias had less room to breathe. But now the world had changed just enough for men like Elias to fight back in ways that hit harder than any argument. He leaned against the rail beside the steps, watching the steady flow of traffic on Abercorn Street, watching people come and go without knowing what was about to unfold behind those shiny dealership doors. And slowly, the heat didn't feel so heavy anymore. At exactly the 9-minute mark, Elias heard the sharp sound of hurried footsteps. He turned his head slightly, not enough to show interest, just enough to acknowledge movement. The glass doors flew open. A man in a navy suit rushed out, almost tripping over his own feet. His hair was slightly out of place, face flushed with panic. Beside him was another salesman, older, well-dressed, clearly someone with seniority. "Mr. Thorne," the man in the navy suit called out, breathless. "Sir, thank you for waiting." The entire showroom turned. Every head, every eye, every mouth that had laughed at him 30 minutes earlier. Even through the glass, Elias could feel their confusion settling into the room like smoke. This was the moment the tide shifted, the moment the quiet became power. And for the first time since he stepped onto the lot, Elias let a small smile touch the corner of his mouth. "Hi, friend. Before we continue, I need your help. We've noticed the channel losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and helps us keep delivering great content for you. Your support means everything. Comment your city or country below. Let's see how far this community reaches. Thank you now. Back to the story." The entire front lobby of Southern Star Mercedes-Benz came to a silent halt. When Mr. Henderson, the owner of the dealership franchise, burst through the glass doors as if the building was on fire, every salesman inside froze mid-breath. His suit jacket flapped behind him, tie crooked, forehead beading with sweat. He wasn't walking toward Elias. He was rushing. Behind him, his top associate, an older man named Carter, scrambled to keep up, clutching a tablet and wiping nervous sweat from his brow. To anyone inside, it looked like the governor himself had just shown up unannounced. But the real shock came when they reached the sidewalk. "Mr. E. Thorne?" Henderson gasped, bending forward with both hands outstretched. "Sir, I am so deeply sorry. I had no idea you were here today." Inside the showroom, every head snapped toward Brent. Brent's smirk dissolved so fast it practically slid off his face. Henderson wasn't done. He turned to Carter. "Why wasn't I told the property owner was on site?" His voice cracked with panic. The inspection wasn't scheduled until next month. The word property hit the sales floor like a lightning bolt. The property owner, the man they laughed at, the man they mocked for his boots. In the reflection of the glass windows, Elias could see their expressions shift: confusion first, then realization, then fear. He didn't hurry to respond. He let the silence do its work. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "Afternoon, Henderson." Henderson nearly bowed. "Sir, please come inside. We'll handle everything right away." As they moved back toward the dealership entrance, Brent stood stiff as a statue, face pale. Elias watched him from the corner of his eye. Brent opened his mouth to speak, but the words got stuck in his throat. Elias stepped into the air-conditioned lobby again, this time with two men practically escorting him like a dignitary. The shift was instant and dramatic. Customers stopped browsing and employees straightened up like soldiers at inspection. The same silence from earlier returned, but this time, it was reverence, not rejection. Henderson motioned to a leather chair near the showroom center. "Please, Mr. Thorne, sit. Water? Sparkling or still? Coffee? Tea? We can bring you anything." Elias sat slowly, his boots resting firmly on the tile, mud and all. Henderson didn't complain. He didn't dare. "Carter!" Henderson barked. "Where's Brent?" Brent stepped forward reluctantly. He looked nothing like the confident salesman from 10 minutes earlier. His shoulders drooped, his breathing hitched, his hands shook. "Right here, sir." Henderson's jaw tightened. "Explain yourself." Brent swallowed hard. "Sir, I didn't know. You thought he was beneath you." Henderson's voice was low but sharp. "You thought you could disrespect the man who owns the land under this entire building." Gasps rippled across the showroom. Even Carter flinched. Elias leaned back in the chair, watching everything unfold like a man who had already lived this scene before, just never with this much control over the outcome. Henderson turned to Elias, voice trembling. "Mr. Thorne, I promise you, this dealership values you. We value every customer. This behavior is unacceptable. If you want him fired, he's gone." Brent's eyes widened. He stared at Elias with silent pleading, realizing his arrogance had led him straight into disaster. But Elias didn't respond right away. He let the sting of the moment settle. He let the room feel the weight of what they'd done. He let Brent sit in the discomfort he'd created. Then he finally spoke. "I came in here," Elias said, his voice calm but carrying thunder beneath it, "ready to buy that GLE 450 for my granddaughter. Cash." No hesitation. Henderson's face went ghost white. Elias continued, eyes fixed on Brent. "But instead of being greeted like a customer, I was treated like trouble walking in the door." Brent winced. "And that's not just bad service," Elias added quietly. "That's bad judgment." A murmur ran through the room. Henderson turned toward Brent, fury boiling over. "You have embarrassed this dealership." But Elias lifted a hand gently, stopping him mid-sentence. "Don't worry," Elias said, eyes still on Brent. "We'll address it, but not by running from the problem." Henderson paused, thrown off. Elias rose from the chair, standing tall despite his age, the quiet power in his presence filling the space like a rising tide. He walked toward the pearl-white GLE 450. Brent stood frozen, breath shallow. And every customer, every staff member watched in stunned silence, waiting to see what the man they had misjudged would do next. They had laughed 10 minutes ago. Now no one dared make a sound. Elias didn't walk toward the GLE 450 in anger. He walked with purpose, slow, steady, grounded. A man whose dignity had never depended on how anyone in that room saw him. The bright showroom lights glinted off the SUV's white exterior as he stopped beside it. Brent stood a few feet away, hands trembling, face pale, looking like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Henderson hovered behind Elias, shoulders tense, afraid to say the wrong thing twice. The entire dealership had gone silent. No phones ringing, no footsteps, no deals happening. Every customer, every employee, every wandering eye was glued to the man they had underestimated. Elias looked at the GLE for a long moment before turning to Brent. "Son," he said quietly, "do you know why I didn't raise my voice at you?" Brent shook his head, barely whispering, "No, sir. Because I've lived long enough to know something you haven't learned yet." Elias folded his hands behind him, posture tall and calm. Sometimes the loudest man in the room is the weakest one. And sometimes the quietest? That's the man you should have respected from the start. Brent blinked hard, swallowing the lump in his throat. Elias pointed once toward the floor, toward the tiny dried speck of mud that had started this whole encounter. "You worried about dirt on your tile. But you never stopped to think about why my boots were dirty." He paused. Everyone leaned in not physically, but emotionally, pulled forward by the weight of his words. "I was at a construction site this morning," Elias continued, "walking the land for a hospital I'm helping fund, a hospital that'll serve this community. Your community. People who look like me. People who look like you." Brent's eyes widened in disbelief. Henderson stiffened. The receptionist behind the counter covered her mouth in shock. Elias stepped closer to Brent until only a couple of feet separated them. Not threatening, just present. "You didn't know that. Because you judged me before you spoke to me. Before you asked a single question." Brent nodded slowly, guilt washing over him. "And worse," Elias said softly, "you assumed something about me that generations of men in my family had to fight against just to survive." His voice lowered, deep and deliberate. "Never confuse labor with poverty." A hush fell over the building. A couple in the back put their hands over their hearts. Someone whispered, "Wow." Elias wasn't finished. "And never confuse dirt on my boots," he added, "with dirt in my character." Brent's breath hitched. He looked like someone had just held up a mirror he'd never seen before. Elias stepped back, giving the young man space to absorb the lesson. He turned slightly toward Henderson. "Your salesman didn't just lose a sale today," Elias said. "He lost a moment to show humanity, a chance to treat a stranger with respect. That's worth more than any commission." Henderson nodded, guilt tightening his features. "Mr. Thorne, I agree completely. And if you want him fired—" Numb. Elias raised a hand again, stopping him. "You don't fix a problem by shoving it out the door. You fix it by teaching it not to repeat itself." Brent lowered his head, shame filling every inch of him. "I don't want him fired," Elias continued. "I want him to learn. That's how growth works. That's how you change a place, a culture, a mindset." Henderson exhaled, partly relieved, partly humbled. Elias then pointed toward the pearl-white GLE 450. "I'm still buying this car. For my granddaughter." He paused. "But Brent is the one who's going to process every piece of paperwork. He's going to walk me through every feature. And he's going to detail this vehicle himself." Brent's mouth dropped open. "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. I'll handle everything, sir." Elias wasn't trying to humiliate him. He wasn't trying to break him. He was trying to rebuild him. "While you clean it," Elias said gently, "I want you to think about every person you ever sized up too quickly. Every name you labeled without knowing the heart behind it. Think about the doors you closed before giving someone a chance to walk through." Brent nodded again, eyes glossy, voice small. "I will, sir. I promise." Elias turned to the rest of the showroom. All those faces, all those stares that had dismissed him earlier. He didn't shame them. He didn't lecture them. He just let the truth sit in the air. Truth has weight, and today, every person inside felt it. Carter cleared his throat, voice shaky. "Mr. Thorne, would you like to move forward with the transaction?" Elias gave a small smile. "Yes. Let's finish what I came here to do." He placed one hand gently on the GLE's door handle. Not claiming the car, claiming the moment. 10 minutes ago, they laughed at him. Now, they couldn't look away. An hour later, the smell of fresh leather filled the showroom as the pearl-white GLE 450 rolled forward, its paint gleaming, tires shining, interior spotless. Brent had kept his word. He washed it, polished it, detailed every inch with the care of a man rebuilding his own character. When he finished, he stepped back with shaky hands, sweat on his forehead, humility in every movement. He didn't make excuses. He didn't hide. He walked up to Elias and handed him the keys like they were something sacred. "Mr. Thorne," he said softly, "thank you for not giving up on me today." Elias took the keys, warm from Brent's palm. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Growth doesn't happen when things are easy," Elias replied. "It happens when you face the truth and decide to do better." Henderson stood nearby, quieter than he'd been all afternoon, shoulders lowered in a way that suggested reflection, not fear now, but understanding. The staff around him tried not to stare, but they couldn't help themselves. They had watched a shift in the room, something real, something human. The young black receptionist approached Elias timidly. "Sir," she whispered, "thank you for standing up. People like me, we see everything, even when we can't say anything." Elias nodded. "Keep your head up. And remember, you deserve to be here just as much as anybody else." She blinked fast, fighting tears, then stepped back to give him space. Elias opened the driver's door, the new car sent, rushing up to meet him. He thought of Alia bright, ambitious, destined for more than he ever had. He pictured her seeing this SUV for the first time, that smile she had when life surprised her in the best way. But before he got in, he looked back at the showroom once more, the same room that had rejected him. The same people who had laughed, the same space that had tried to shrink him, now stood silent, respectful, changed. Not because he shouted, not because he demanded power, but because he demonstrated it quietly, firmly, without losing himself. Elias climbed inside, closed the door gently, and started the engine. The SUV hummed to life, smooth and confident. As he pulled forward, he lowered the window and spoke the final words of the day. "Never judge a man by his boots," he said, voice calm. "Judge him by the path he's walked and the one he's building for those who come after him." And with that, he drove off the lot, leaving behind more than a lesson. He left a legacy, a reminder that dignity is louder than prejudice, that respect can rewrite a room, and that sometimes the man people overlook is the one who owns the ground beneath their feet. Savannah wouldn't forget that day, neither would the dealership, and certainly not Brent Malone. Hi, friend. If this story moved you, don't leave just yet. Before you go, please subscribe to the channel. It's free. It helps us grow, and it tells YouTube this kind of storytelling matters. Comment the city or country you're watching from. We love seeing how far our community reaches. And share this video with someone who needs to hear a powerful black story today. Thank you for being here. Now go spread the word.